think without further ado, let's jump right into the panel discussion. Before that, I just want to introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Kai, and I lead the startup ecosystem for AWS in Vietnam. At the same time, I also run the GenAI Startup Initiative for Southeast Asia for AWS. And in my free time, because I love GenAI so much, I also advise GenAI Fund, which is the first GenAI fund in Southeast Asia. So I think we have a very interesting mix of panel today. Some very, very technical, some very focused on business, and then some very focused on academia perspective. So I think it will be very, very interesting to just hear a bit of introduction from the speakers, and then we can dive right into a few key topics that I myself am very curious about today.
Sure. I can start. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. And my name is Lijie. I work for a fintech company called Bitexco. I work there as an infrastructure engineer. So yeah, I think today I will focus on the technical side of AI.
You guys heard from me already?
Hi everyone, my name is Phan. I was actually born here in Vietnam, in Nam Soi, and moved to the States when I was 7. I was very fortunate to be able to go to Stanford, where I studied management science and engineering with a concentration in computational social science and education, and that's where I met Chuck and Lijie. Right now I work as the head of growth and customer lifecycle for a startup called Rippling. We do human capital management. And what I'm really focused on in my role is being an enterprise user of AI, thinking about how we're going to get that competitive edge. So I can give the business perspective on right now what companies who are trying to stay at the forefront of AI in business are thinking about in terms of what we adopt and why.
Awesome, thank you. Let's give another round of applause for coming in. I actually did some stalking. I always do stalking whenever I have speakers on the panel. I consider myself a pretty good stalker. So I saw that you guys have done some teaching before coming to this trip. And I guess you guys are really good friends and you always travel together. And I think it's really fun that you choose to come here during Christmas season, and we didn't expect such gifts. So thank you so much for coming here to share your learnings. I think to what has been shared and discussed so far, there's actually one challenge that always pops up when we interact with our customers and enterprises, startups. I think the audience here, they are mostly enterprises, and there are a few startup founders and ecosystem stakeholders. And I get a lot of questions like, hey, Kai, you run a lot of AI events. There's so many news on AI, and today this model is better. Today the other model is much better. There are so many different announcements, and Chuck, you have kindly taken us through all the trends like AI in climate, robotics, and when I was just looking through all this information myself, I was very overwhelmed, right? And I think the same thing goes through these different stakeholders as they try to think about implementing AI. How do they actually make use of it while there's so much going on? So from your perspective, how should they be thinking about it from a learning and since we talk a lot about learning today, right? So from that learning perspective, what should be the strategy and approach for them to actually absorb all these things and put them into use?
I can start. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the teaching that we did today, and we actually taught in UEH this morning, and I'm quite impressed with how the schools and the students think of the learning of AI. And from my background, because I'm in engineering, and so I see AI as a tool to lower the technical barrier. So for example, like maybe a lot of students think that if I do not have a computer science degree, and it's hard for me to code or become an engineer. And I think with AI, a lot of students will gain the confidence that I am able to do this, just like people with a CS background. And AI can enable people, as long as you have a good idea, you will have AI to help you to do all these technical things that you were not able to do. So that's what I think of the learning. In terms of what to focus, I think just to get started. Yes, every day we feel very overwhelmed, but as long as you get started, you got to start from somewhere, right? What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, and I think the pace of change is really increasing as we've all experienced, and companies in the modern age have to keep pace with that. And so what we're seeing at Stanford, a lot of the companies that I work with through executive education, it's increasingly about setting up systems for experimentation. So whether that looks like a corporate accelerator program, or whether that looks like a corporate venture capital arm, some mechanism to start experimenting with the new technologies and having contact with the startup ecosystem to be able to try out and see where AI is providing value in your sector. I think that's really the most critical thing, because whether it's AI or whether it's blockchain, there's going to continue to be these waves of technological disruption. And so modern companies have to have some mechanism for this kind of experimentation and innovation at the cutting edge.
Today I learned, and I venture to assert that your local AI expert is probably the 16-year-old in your life. They're very used to having a computer as their second brain. And we saw today during our teaching earlier this morning of early to late, like college students, is it's so native in the way that they think about their impact in the world. And I don't think we taught them that many new stuff that they haven't been exposed to, which I think is a really great thing. And then from a corporate perspective, like Chuck said, it's about seeing where are we doing the things that we can get leverage against the competition by investing in AI. I think maybe later we can talk about like the considerations that we have to think about, that we must think about, like security and risk and control. But for us, we're very willing to try anything to improve the business. And I think that the appetite is really strong. And so depending on what it is that you're focused on, my day job is in marketing. So that's when I'm thinking about how to leverage AI. So whatever you're passionate about, I think there's a lot of resources out there.
Maybe to zoom in a little bit more on that, like you talked about system experimentations and keep trying. Is there any mental model, or is there any habit or things that you try that work for yourself, or stories that you've seen that amidst all this craziness, you stay focused on one or two key things that really worked out for you and the use cases that you're looking at?
I think the main thing from my perspective is to have a data-driven culture in making these decisions. There's a lot of companies that surprisingly don't have that, where it's the highest paid person makes the decisions, or it's the CEO's pet project that goes forward. And so I think that's always a recipe for disaster. And the more high-performing companies, or Google, for instance, is famous for Larry and Sergey wanting to see the data. And so whatever the change might be, whatever the new technology, there's got to be some mechanism set up in the company to gather the appropriate data to see, does this actually create value for our organization? And to have the decisions be made around data. And that's what enables, when you have a fresh young grad who's much more AI literate, much more versed in the various AI options, to be able to get through the corporate bureaucracy, a new exciting idea, is having that mechanism to be able to show the data and prove it.
Yeah, I think for us it's really important to have a framework. So I think as an enterprise user, there are things that I'm thinking about. For example, first and foremost is security and control. How can we audit and make sure that our customer data is safe? The next is like, where are the costs that we're trying to optimize for? So that's obviously a huge deal. I could use the most expensive tool in the world, but it's not going to be adopted fiscally, so that doesn't make sense. And then the third is, how do we scale it? Like, what are the specific workflows where we scale it with? Where do we still need a human in the loop, and where it makes sense to have? That's having that framework, I think, in addition to the data, and the data maybe fits into all of those pieces, will help you stay on course. Because it is very distracting, and I think there are lots of talented people building things out there. But at the end of the day, what is your goal?
Yeah, exactly. I want to echo on that. So two pattern I have seen in the past maybe 1 year. because my job is to help these people who want to build an AI app to deploy it, right? And so you see so many people want to build, and actually it's not just the engineers who want to build a new feature for your product. We have the most successful AI application we have deployed at my company actually was built by a customer support person. So this person, he knows how the problems of the customers. So he actually built the AI bot that still sustained after so many attempts. So I think one trend I have seen is you really need to know your customers. It may not be the most technical person who built the best product, but rather the person who knows the problem who can build a good one. And I said AI helped to lower the barrier. So like everyone try to deploy a application, and then because the resources become more scarce and the competition actually become more fierce. So if you cannot prove the value of this app that you built, and your server is costs like a lot of money because they are all running on GPU, and then of course the company is not going to be happy, and so they want you to prove your value fast, and if not, and then very quickly you don't have your chance anymore.
Okay, let's shift gear a little bit. So we're talking about training and adoption and how they think about learning. So I would like to put a bit of focus on enterprise startup collaboration. And there's a reason for that. So there's this GenAI startup report that we do on the startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia. So over 92% of the GenAI startups in Southeast Asia are B2B focused. And that has never happened before. So if you know a little bit of history of startups in Southeast Asia, it's always B2C focused, mostly on the logistics, e-commerce, travel, and things have changed because of how GenAI has accelerated a lot of different things. And founders, entrepreneurs, builders, they are thinking about B2B first as a way to have some level of moat and defensibility as they go to market, right? So, but at the same time, enterprises they really want to adopt AI as well. But at the same time, there are so many challenges, right? Procurement cycles, stakeholder management, the gap in knowledge and exposures, and so I'm just curious because I think it's still very nascent for us here. I think a lot of B2B startups they are trying to really connect the dots and work closely with enterprises to build the right AI experience for enterprises. Have you seen any interesting stories or case studies that work in the context of enterprise startup collaboration in the context of GenAI? Because I mean, there are a lot of unicorns and really huge, fast scalers in the US now that are serving vertical AI at the moment. So I'm very curious to hear and how maybe this can inspire the audience to actually have stronger collaboration between enterprise and startups.
Yeah, I can start on this question. So because we use a lot of AI-based softwares, and a lot of times when a product come to us and they want to sell us some AI-based solution, and I see the pattern usually like we start with using some tool provided by AWS, for example, because that's usually the simplest way for you to get started. And then after using that for a while, if your product can prove its value, and then the company started to think about building house, right? That's when you need your customization, you need to build your own pipeline. So if you are a company building your AI solutions and then you want to learn and you want to sell it to a company, you want to learn like what stage this company is at. Like, are they still at the stage that they are mostly using some mature solutions, for example, AWS, or they are at the stage that they need to do their own customization and they need to build their own RAG, and that's when like maybe they are looking for some more like customization, and that's when you can pitch your very customized solution. Another thing I think is interesting because nowadays it's just very hard, at least in the US, it's very hard to get the GPU servers. And a lot of times you start to think about your data and what is the most efficient way to run on these GPUs. And that's what I think Chuck mentioned, all these data op company, it's a big market. So for example, for us, we get tons of data just every day. But you have to truly dig into your data. You need your engineers to really understand your own data in order to make it useful, right? So like I can buy a simple solution on AWS, but to have the right people to know how to use your data, and that is a big gap that I have seen.
I think I want to speak more to actually having the right people, right? Like when you're building solutions, what function are you building it for? What is the culture are you in that function? Your tool for a marketer is going to look very different than your tool for a developer. Is going to look very different than your tool for finance. I think the three considerations that I have that I spoke about earlier will look vastly different for my partners in legal and finance than for us as marketing team. And so I think you need to build up like AI. I think, there's a lot of hope that it will introduce efficiencies and maybe even replace people in the loop, but that's who you're working with, so you need to build for them if you're building.
I'm going to go back to my earlier point again and reinforce it here, which is that in any kind of digital transformation, AI or whatever it might be, it requires a combination of the technology and then the culture and the organizational systems and processes. So the large companies that I've worked with, which have included a bank and a telecom company, they experience this problem of they want to engage with the startup ecosystem, like you're saying, but then very quickly, if they start engaging with the startup ecosystem, then all the startups rush to engage. And there's so many enterprise startups out there, like you mentioned, because there's been this kind of gold rush, kind of boom, maybe even bubble phenomenon. And so very quickly, the product teams and the engineers get overwhelmed. And they start to complain that, oh, you're introducing all these startups to us, and we don't have time, we're trying to do our day job. And so they come to work with us at Stanford because they recognize that they need to create some kind of system, some kind of process to be able to filter these startups and just introduce the most promising ones to their product teams. And so there's a kind of process for ingesting new technologies from the startup world that large companies that are not accustomed to engaging with the startup ecosystem have kind of a learning curve to figure out how to do.
So is it right to understand that the answer is to come to you?
Of course.
But maybe since you brought it up, like you do work with large banks and help with digital transformation and then introduce them to like startups that are relevant to them. Are there any models that work? Like is it some sort of a matchmaking? Is there like a workshop innovation involved in training the executives? What does that look like, and how has it worked out for the enterprises that you work with?
Yeah, so this looks, there's a bunch of different models for doing this. And I think everyone's still trying to figure out either the best model or the best model that works for them. So just going out and acquiring startups, that's one way to do it. And some companies like Cisco, for instance, develop that as capability. How to evaluate startups, how to integrate them into the company, what kind of valuations to look for. But it's a very risky strategy because it's very easy to overpay for startups, and companies are kind of famous for overpaying too high of a valuation and then struggling with the integration. So I don't recommend jumping straight to the acquire startups that have interesting technology. It's a very, very high risk strategy. I think it's better to start with baby steps. And so usually the initial baby step is to have some kind of internal corporate accelerator. So most of the companies that I work with took that as the first step. Internal employees that have an idea, or the top performing engineers can get some time and some dedicated space and resources to be able to work on new ideas that they've had internally. This is also a retention strategy for companies that don't want to lose their best engineers who go out and do startups externally when there's so much venture capital available. And so then you get some people within the company that start to become familiar with entrepreneurship, and you start to see how much progress can a small entrepreneurial team of our internal engineers make, and you have some way to benchmark the external startups against and figure out how to work with. So that's a quick answer.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. So I think in the context of ASEAN, we're seeing that the change of speed. So like you say, right, it's always about trying out the solutions and then incubating, accelerating, and then considering M&As. And we have seen quite a few examples of just M&A right now, right, which is very risky. But I mean, I think it's a good sign that the enterprises here are really thinking forward. Hopefully, we can have more sessions from you to encourage more enterprises to take big bets in AI right now, considering the change that we're seeing. So I think I want to move on to the last theme that I want to focus on, which is building a GenAI hub and ecosystem. So obviously, I think US is at the right, left, center of it, right? I think the best thing that I'm always jealous of is that you're surrounded by all the right people, and for you, the information is just one person away from you. But Vietnam, interestingly, based on the report I mentioned again, it has the second highest GenAI startups, which is just following Singapore behind, and the gap is really small. And if you know the dynamics, a lot of Singapore startups they actually hire and build their tech teams or CTOs in Vietnam. So in fact, I think Vietnam is probably the default GenAI development hub for Southeast Asia. Right? And also, there's that recent news of NVIDIA acquiring BigBrain, and there's a few more M&As happening in the AI space in Vietnam, which will be announced soon. So all these good news are showing us that Vietnam has that potential, right? But I just wonder, like from your perspective, from the time you spent in the US, what are the other key ingredients that you think Vietnam should have to actually continue to innovate? Because even AI is disrupting coding right now, right? Like you said, and Vietnam has a lot of developers. But that strength, that moat will not last forever, right? So what are the other ingredients that you think with your limited time here? But what are the things that Vietnam can do better or learn from?
I think something that in practice I'm seeing a lot, and we've spoken about it a ton today, is an AI-enabled workforce, where I don't think we're super close to having AIs replace all of our workflows, right? So the technical skills and the understanding of how to best leverage AI, you still need people to do that. You still need independent contributors who can, take you to the next level by using AI. I personally run a global team and some of us are offshores. I have workers from the Philippines that I work with. And one thing that has tremendously unlocked productivity for me is training my team in the Philippines to use AI, and reinventing knowledge work and your workforce is something that I think Vietnam, with like our increasing rates of college education and people who are technically proficient, that's another key ingredient in AI adoption and leverage. That doesn't have to do with developing new products. It's developing human capital that are really savvy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the education part is really, it will make a big difference in terms of the competition of AI. And I would also argue local students and local people know the problem set very well than people with the strong technical background. So like what I said, like the person who built the best AI app at my company is actually the person from the customer support team because they know the problem. So I usually like joke in Silicon Valley, sometimes you see this we call like first world problem, right? Like people want to build another social media, but like only people from local the problem the best. And I think AI will not change that. You really need to have a problem to start with. And then on top of that, train the talent to use the technology to solve your local problem. So I think definitely like local market and they have the advantage of that.
So I often make the analogy that a good startup ecosystem, the reason why it's so hard to replicate Silicon Valley and other places around the world is because it's a bit like baking a cake. All the ingredients have got to come together. You've got to have it at the right temperature, the right amount of time. And so I think, all the pieces of the ecosystem have to be there and play their role. So the startups, obviously, the entrepreneurs have to be out there taking the biggest risk, The universities have a very important role to play, as Bao and Lijie were mentioning, in training the engineers and the entrepreneurs of the future, and also being kind of a common ground that people can come together and create, also events like this that bring the community together. The large companies, the enterprises, they also have an important role to play. Just as you were mentioning, they've got to be the customers, they've got to be the acquirers, they've got to develop these capabilities for how to engage productively with the startup ecosystem. The regulations also have to be there to make it all come together. And so I think it's all of these factors getting them to come together. But I think Vietnam really has great opportunities, and the ecosystem has really been making tremendous progress. So I think you all should be proud of that.
Cool. So I think you guys have given a lot of advice. So I'm not going to end this with more advice from you. So I think one key is to drive call to actions. Right. So to the audience here, they are startups, they're enterprises, ecosystem builders. What is the best way for them to collaborate with you?
Well, I think, as I've been encouraging you, coming and building a connection to Silicon Valley and to Stanford is a great idea. I mean, this is the great thing about Silicon Valley, and there's so many connections and opportunities and international networks. And so I think, having some tie back to Silicon Valley for the information and the networking is really helpful for a lot of regions around the world. And we benefit from that, of course, because then we become the melting pot. But I think the partners around the world benefit from it as well.
What about Lijie and Bob? What's the best way to collaborate with you? Yes.
Yeah, always looking for connections, and I actually think it's easier to connect nowadays. You can learn how to code with ChatGPT just online. Like I have been following all these coders, or people without any coding experience, just watch them live on YouTube. Like they do this, they just live demo how they use these technologies. So I don't think there is any limitation. Like if you are in Vietnam or if you are in Silicon Valley, sure, maybe connections that you still need to know that person, but there's nothing stopping you. Just reach out to people on LinkedIn. And in Silicon Valley, it's funny because people call themselves digital nomad, right? Like they move around, they roam around the world and try to find opportunities. So I really think that there's nothing stopping you no matter where you are.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's really helpful to know your audience. Like, who's the person you're reaching out to, and what is your own purpose? It's a lot easier to collaborate that I found when I've done my homework about what is it that I'm looking for and why is it that I'm talking to this person. I find that it works much better than a shot in the general dark, because I think a lot of, everyone is trying to build their network. They're juggling a lot of different ideas and asks and people they can meet. So the more you can make it real for them, what your vision is, the easier that I think it is for them to connect with you, and vice versa.
Cool. Before we end, I think we have some time for a few questions. Any audience here? Cool.
Yes, we are entrepreneurs and we go with my team, and we had two ideas lead to restaurant, and please verify SBC to see if it's interesting or not. Number one, and continue to run our corporate platform for public school in Vietnam. We have 40 already, and we aim AI tool for tutoring. Yeah, so for Vietnamese high school and secondary school. And the second idea is that we open new after school institution for secondary and high school. Like you see that they were eager for AI, so we help them to learn how to adapt AI or blah blah, or which with the like in Singapore we see a lot of after school there. So two ideas, do you see any pro and cons for that idea? And next year, which idea we can go very fast?
So I'll give a quick response on this. I really applaud anyone who's using technology to improve education, because I think it's such an important thing and has such potential. I think my key pieces of feedback would be one for raising money from venture capital. It's got to be a large, scalable opportunity, and so for the K through 12 market, how scalable that is going to be to potentially venture level kind of returns. If it's more limited to Vietnam, or if the market size is smaller, versus if it can be scaled throughout Southeast Asia, then it starts to look more interesting as a VC investment. But the other thing is I would lead with the 40 partners, because that's great. And these days, with being able to do no code, low code development, get a prototype out there, I'm really looking for some level of traction, and VCs are scrutinizing that traction and the early revenue.
Hello, all the speakers and all the audience. I'm Tung from IAMSO.org, and I have questions about education. Maybe for Professor Chuck. Like in the past, we study and we do thesis. Probably I graduated computing science. I have to got my course thesis all by myself. And nowadays we have GPT, LLM, so a lot of things change. So I want to ask you, how is the education that change to adopt for the new era of technology? All this.
Yeah, great question. I think this is something that everyone in the education field is trying to figure out. So no doubt there's going to be a lot of change, but I think it's also going to take some time. I mean, I lived through and was an entrepreneur in the MOOC era, massive online open courses, and when Coursera and Udacity were first getting started, and we started NovoEd, there was a lot of hype that this was going to totally disrupt higher education, and why do you need to spend 4 years getting a degree, and you can learn online now. But I think in the years since then, we've discovered that there's a lot of things about the traditional education system that are very challenging to disrupt. And that while it's true that these new technologies and platforms can enable anyone to learn on their own, it's actually a very small percentage of students that are self-motivated enough to actually do that. So, Larry Page, apparently, when he first heard about Coursera and Udacity, said, why do you need these platforms? You can learn whatever you want on the web. And that might be true for him. But for your average student, they benefit a lot from being in a class, having some structure, having some deadlines, getting that certification. So I think there will be changes, but there's a lot of pieces. The alumni network, the reputation of the school. A lot of these pieces all have to kind of come together. And so I think the traditional education system is going to still look similar, but a lot of AI and these new technologies are going to be incorporated into that basic structure.
Yeah, I know the question was for Chuck, but if I may add, there's a lot, we spoke to students earlier today, and there's a lot of anxiety about, okay, I can get really good at AI, but does that make me stupider? And I think that's very valid, right? But I find that as I'm learning, I think I'm in between people who have to memorize stuff and people who have complete access to AI. I think the opportunity here that I see for a lot of students that's pretty immediate is this ability to de-emphasize rote memorization, which I think in a lot of countries we still emphasize, and prioritize problem solving, how to break down problems, how to put structure or break the structure around problems. I think that's something that's very exciting that children get to do now. They don't need to memorize the Pythagorean theorem. That sucks. They get to figure out what they're going to do with it, what they're going to build with it. I think there's still a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great point. Phan's answer was actually much better than mine.
Yeah, and I just want to add a last point to your question. I think even though I talked about AI can help to lower the technical barrier, but I think as an infrastructure engineer, we all care about the fundamentals, right? Like all these things that a non-CS background student can make. It's just more sort of like a prototype, right? But you have to care about the performance of your application from the beginning. If you are the very lucky 1% that can grow your app to at scale, like you definitely don't want to do the scaling when your app is big, because if your app can run on 100 users and GPU only makes the problem even worse. You need to really worry about how performant your app is. So like we joked about, like anyone can write application now, and you can just tell whose application is like intern's code and the other one is like really computer science students code. And like O of 1 or O of n, or like the performance, and it's still like people can still tell the difference of these different performance of the application.
You asked the best question. The moment you mention the keyword education, all of them become super excited.
That's right.
Your passion for education. And with that, thank you so much for spending time with us, and hopefully we can get to hear more and learn more from you. And come visit us more often.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.